Welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I'm Matt Manocherian, joined today by Neil Stratton of Inside the League. You all know me from SIS and the work that we do around here. Justin Stein, our producer, is off this week having a baby. Congratulations, Justin. But Neil works over at Inside the League, where basically he is the insider for all of the people on the inside. Anybody who is in not just the agent game, in the scouting, the evaluation game, front office happenings. Neil is the industry insider who is, something like, what's the newspaper they have in Hollywood that's like the insider?
Variety.
Yeah. But you're more than that. You're like, this is your favorite NFL analyst's favorite NFL analyst. So Neil, welcome back on Off the Charts Football Podcast. Always good to have you.
It's very kind of you. I really appreciate the intro, Matt. We've been friends for a long time. I never got to be a scout, so the next best thing is, I guess, following scouts and following scouting and that kind of thing. So, to the degree that that's true, hopefully, I'm really honored to be that person. It's funny, when I started Inside the League, the idea was I want Inside the League to be the variety of football. So for you to say that, then hopefully I have achieved that to some degree anyway.
I think that's, around the league, obviously lots of people, and not just in the pro game, but in the college game too. I think that a lot of people, there's very few people that don't know who you are that are really on the inside and seeing how things go. So
I appreciate it, brother.
That's good. I'm happy we made that variety connection. We should mention, let's just hit it right off the top, because we saw the press release come out about Inside the League doing some work with the third generation of the XFL, the Rocks version. So what are you and Dwayne cooking up over there? Anything exciting on the XFL front?
Well, it is certainly exciting to partner with the league, and we're really excited about what's ahead. Our role is probably not what a lot of people have come to believe based on that very kind press release. We're certainly not the arbiters of who's going to be on the rosters or anything like that. As a matter of fact, next week, I believe the league is going to announce the names of the GMs of each of the 8 respective teams. And I think people are going to really be intrigued by that, especially people that are listening to this podcast, because I think people that are listening to this are interested about how leagues work and how front offices are built and therefore teams and what have you. So we have a role. It's kind of a fluid role. We help in getting the word out to agents in that community. We help in getting the word out about how to get players onto rosters and how the league is going to be populated and all those kind of things. And certainly serving kind of an advisor, consulting role on a number of different things. And we're proud to be there. Doug Whaley's been a longtime friend. I believe his title is Senior VP of Player Personnel, and they've got a lot of capable people. Obviously, they're running the league, and they've got really good investment behind them. And so I think the league has a great chance to have legs. And I think anyone who's interested in the game and interested in the development of players should really give them a look next spring. And I think it's going to be an exciting product. I mean, to some degree, for those of us weirdos who are old enough to remember the World League of American Football and all the things that took place there and all the players that kind of, especially quarterbacks, that kind of got developed over there and then came back over here and had nice NFL careers. Yeah, I think this is an opportunity for the league to have something like that, and so it'll be a lot of fun to watch. And and it's an honor to have just one small role in the league.
Yeah, you mentioned Doug Whaley. I know that he was always tight with an old colleague of mine from the Saints, Jim Monos, and I think he's involved with him over there on the XFL side too. So right. It's really interesting because we definitely saw this with the Senior Bowl several years ago with Jim Nagy coming in and it becoming kind of much more NFL front office, like much more kind of it felt like they really built themselves up kind of like in the image of an NFL team scouting department. And now we've seen as some of these leagues have started popping up, there are some of them that are really, this I think is the biggest example of it. It's almost like they're like XFL's like NFL Junior in a lot of ways. Like they're really trying to build it up. You mentioned the GMs that they're announcing for each of the teams. It feels like they're taking a really professional outlook in terms of filling their rosters and doing all the things that, the way that the NFL looks at things, that's how they're looking at it. And it starts to me when you compare it to take, fan controlled football. I don't know if you've looked at that at all, the FCF. Yeah. But
I have, Matt, and the FCF's a little different, obviously.
Yeah, they never run the plays that I try to get them to select. They give you like the menu. Have you seen during the games you can choose like to help call plays, and I'm always looking at it and I'm like, all right, this is the play call right here. Their edge defender's been all over the place. Like, this is the guy that you want to put in a bind on this play, and we're calling like the most ridiculous pass plays I've ever seen and stuff like that. And so I had to stop trying with that one because I don't think they're looking at it the exact same way that I am in terms of that one.
It's a bit of a work in progress, but it's an exciting concept, and I mean, I'm rooting for him. I always say I don't pick sides when it comes to leagues. I mean, I want as much football as possible. I mean, I'm one of those guys.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, let's flip it over from the XFL over to the NFL because it's been the craziest offseason ever, probably.
Wow, it has been a busy one. It seems like every year, Matt, you're talking to scouts in April and everyone says, hey, it's going to be really crazy in May. And then it doesn't really get started, and then things don't really happen. And then people are kind of like last year, it turned out to be a very busy year, about twice as many moves as we normally track. But most of them were kind of in-house moves. You didn't see big names changing teams. You didn't see guys that you never dreamed would be let go, getting let go. And that's been kind of the theme this year. I mean, you probably read, I think it was 2 weeks ago, there had been almost 599 years of scouting dumped on the street in the first 3 weeks post-draft. I mean, that is a dramatic amount of experience that's being, that's no longer working with NFL teams. And when you look
at a few more decades to that already since then, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Another 30. I mean, with the Steelers news today, we're approaching, we're approaching 700. But when you look at the volatility of college football right now, and, if you're a running back who has any success, you're not staying more than 3 years, in college. And maybe one of those years was a redshirt year. You may, at this point, you may have played for 3 programs by the time you get out.
Right.
There's so many different, with the portal, there are so many variables now. I would think, I want guys that I know have skins on the wall. And that's kind of the opposite of where we're going right now. And it's an interesting time to be tracking the league because there is so much experience that's kind of being turned out, asked to retire, what have you. And, there are going to be some really serious challenges, I think, especially for those at the GM and executive level with NFL teams who are making the decisions.
So I want to dive in on that kind of the college situation right now real quick, because I think one thing that happened was COVID. And like 2020 was really weird. We saw how it affected the last 2 draft classes, where we sort of had like a lot of high quality players, but not a lot of players in general in the draft in 2021. And then in 2022, it was a glut of all these players that are running out of eligibility and had to come out. But there was very few, superstar, we ended up with Trayvon Walker as the number 1 pick to many people's chagrin. So I think that was one thing. But the other thing, like you mentioned with the transfer portals, it kind of feels like when NBA made the one and done rule, and that like we need to sort of figure out what our new, like, what is this going to look like now? Are we going to value only players that are 3 years removed from high school and try to be like all in on upside? Baseball was like that for a little while, where they drafted all the high school kids and then they pivoted. And now you're more college kids than high school kids getting drafted in the high rounds there because they started to find, well, once we've seen them play a few years and they get developed, then we know what we're getting. So this is a better investment. I'm curious about, NIL hasn't even begun to shake out, right?
Oh man, and that's just another one. I mean, I spoke to scouts last year because I was curious about how they felt NIL would impact their evaluation. And I think, honestly, most scouts were kind of excited about it because it was one more marker for a kid's maturation. Can he handle that spotlight? Hey, we're finding out right now if this kid is in it for the sunshine or if he's in to play ball.
Yeah, that makes
because
sense.
of NIL, and so I guess to some degree that was a positive. But now we're starting, the Addison kid, I think at Pittsburgh, basically it seemed to me, what I read, it was almost straight, what can I get? This is why I'm leaving. And if we start to see big players take that attitude, wow. If it starts happening with quarterbacks, if it starts happening with some of the other players, it wasn't that long ago, Matt. I think you remember it, when the Parcells rule was 4 years as a starter, X number of completions, all these kind of things. There aren't any quarterbacks to satisfy the Parcells rules anymore, and that's true of almost every position now. I mean, again, there's just so much volatility that you can't fall to the triangle numbers, and certain productivity levels and that kind of thing, like you could in the past. You've got to really be on top of exactly what your team is looking for and exactly where the league is going from a trend standpoint, or you're going to blow it, man. You're going to blow it hard. And especially when you're looking at maybe a 2-year, 3-year window on a GM now, man, you have got to get almost every pick right. Certainly those day 1 and day 2 picks for sure.
All right, well, let's talk about some of those new GMs, because we saw a whole bunch of people come in and join teams this year. Where do you want to start as far as that goes? Which of those really intrigue you, whether it's New York, Minnesota, Chicago? You could reel them off.
Let's talk about a couple of them, I think, that are intriguing to me. I really like what Joe Schoen has done in New York, and I've never met Schoen, obviously never worked with him, but it seems like he's bringing in people that I think are really good evaluators. Mike DeReese, new national scout that he plucked from the Colts. Not only has Mike been doing this for a long time, and I think widely respected across the league, but I really like what the Colts have done in their front office. I'm a big fan of Chris Ballard. As you know, they won the best draft award. I believe it was for the 18 drafts.
Whenever they got Q, it was that draft.
Yeah, it was a nice draft for him. But I think Mike's been a big voice there for a long time. So to be able to land him, I think is a real coup for him. I like the fact,
he's top notch. We should say right off. Reese is top notch from the New York area. When I first met him, he was actually working at Stony Brook at the time. Before he spent probably a decade in Indianapolis now. A couple of regimes there that he's been through and seen kind of how you build it. He's an exciting one. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, I agree. Everything. And he's a guy that has paid his dues, worked his way up. You root for people like that. It's funny because when I reported that the Giants had let Chris Pettit go, their college director, and a couple other people, it was like New Year's Day of 2000, New Year's Eve of 2000 for the Giants fans. I mean, it was an explosion of excitement. And the next thing was, well, who's the next college director going to be? And I think there's a perception out there that if you've got your director of college scouting is the guy who runs your whole board, and he's the one that makes all the picks and tells the GM who to take. And not to diminish what the college director does, not at all, because that's certainly an important role. But Shane decided not to hire one, and I don't think that's a bad thing. Now, I think what my understanding is, he had some people he wanted. They got blocked because they were highly regarded within their organizations, and so he want, rather than forcing it, he's going to kind of let it play out. But he brought Dennis Hickey with him from Buffalo. Here's a guy who's a former GM. He's seen.
Were they in Miami together as well?
Yeah, they were in Miami as well. Yeah, they sure were. And I think that, I don't know if Hickey will serve as the college director de facto per se, but they've got enough upper level management and organization there that I think they're not going to be hurt by not having one. So I think the Giants are in pretty good shape. They brought in all the people they brought in, not just Mike, but others that they brought in, I like. So I think they're off to a really good start. Found out yesterday that Justin Marcus, who's a guy who's been in a lot of the Zooms that we do here at ITL, is a new scouting assistant there. So I'm excited for him. Chris Rossetti, I think, is a solid addition on the pro side as their pro director. So I'm excited about what they're doing there. I think
when you look at, their first draft, what did they had at least 10 picks that they all kinds of depth throughout the draft that they got there. And then the 2 first rounders, 2 of the top players on a lot of people, there are people that would have taken them number 1 and number 2 between Thibodeau and Neal.
Absolutely
right. I think they're off to a promising start.
Yeah.
And we've seen Belichick do that before, right? Like, I don't have a defensive coordinator because I feel really comfortable overseeing that process. And then we'll see when these guys compete to move into that position. Then we'll bring in that director of college scouting or elevate that director of college scouting, depending on how it plays out. So it seems like a reasonable strategy.
And this, Matt, every front office is built differently. There's a kind of a comfort level in, oh, well, here you have an NFL front office, and you have this, and this. You don't have to do it that way. And as long as you're successful and you have a very ordered chain of command and everyone gets to be heard, then you don't have to necessarily check all those boxes per se. So I think the Giants are off to a good start. And as a guy who believes in it all starts up front, getting players of that caliber in the first round, I think is a great start to a new era there.
Yeah, no doubt about that. All right, which other teams are you interested in? Because there's New York.
Let's talk about the Bears. Another team that I feel has put a premium on bringing in good evaluators. I have to admit my bias first. Ian Cunningham, their new assistant GM, actually played for me when I ran the Hula Bowl in 2008.
Nice.
And so it's kind of cool to see his evolution and have tracked his rise. And so I'm a big fan of Ian's. But, I think I don't know Ryan Poles, but I know a lot of people that do. And I think there are a lot of people that are pretty excited when he got the job there, obviously. But I like how they've built things as well. Again, they're bringing in people that are trusted evaluators. I think Breck Ackley was elevated to assistant director of college this year. Breck was one of our Bart list winners for this year, our inaugural list. And for those who don't know, we put every scout in either conference to a vote with all the scouts, and they were allowed to vote on who their 10 best were in each conference. Breck was one of those 10 in the NFC. So I think tracking him and his rise is good. And I think they're making good decisions there. They brought in Ryan Kavanaugh, who's been with the Texans and another team prior to that. I can't remember, maybe the Colts. And Ryan's another good evaluator, just came from Ohio State where he was the portal guy. I like what they've done on the pro side as well. I think they've made a lot of good moves. So, and let me say also, I think notwithstanding the fact that maybe some people were dissatisfied with, the quarterback pick and a couple other things that happened, I think they've got a good solid scouting department. And I think that's why you saw Champ Bailey go to Las Vegas as the assistant GM there. I think the building blocks were there, and I think they made the front office even stronger. So I think they have a good staff, and I'd be excited if I'm a Bears fan.
So that's interesting. So you feel like they're really well structured on sort of that personnel front. But when I look at the personnel on the field, the cupboard's pretty bare. In fact, you mentioned Justin Fields being something that might have upset people the way that went down. He also is probably, the biggest bright spot when you look at their roster and you think, okay, what is the upside here? There's not a lot of young talent. And of course, without the first round pick this year.
I was actually going back to Trubisky, Matt, because I think that was probably the defining decision of Ryan Pace's NFL GM career, and it didn't work out the way they hoped. And so now Pace is in Atlanta and they've got a new GM there. And we'll see about Fields. I was a proponent of them selecting Fields. We'll see what kind of a jump he takes in year 2, From a talent standpoint, you're right. They've got some work to do. That's why they've got a new GM in there. But I think that they have a good chance to repopulate with good players. I don't feel like I'm going out too much of a limb there. I really feel like they've got some talented evaluators there, and I think the best is yet to come. We'll see.
Both those teams, I think, did a lot to the Giants and the Bears. They did a lot to kind of rebuild their cores. They both had a lot of late round picks this year, a year, like we mentioned before, where there were a lot of players. There were a lot of kind of opportunities for guys there that weren't super high caliber, potentially rebuilding, the backbone of their roster. It's going to be really important when we look back 3 years from now, how those 5th and 6th and 7th round picks, if any of them panned out.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And then, I think another place that's kind of interesting is the Raiders. when they named Ziegler as their new GM, what I was told is Ziegler's a guy that recognizes his strengths and weaknesses, and his background was on the pro side in New England. And so he wasn't going to come in there and try to rebuild the college side by himself. And so he brought, we mentioned Champ Bailey that came in as their assistant GM from the Bears. Champ's been around, been with the Broncos. He's known a lot of people. He's interviewed for a lot of GM jobs. He's got a lot of connections. And so they were able to I think, build their scouting department in a way that's going to be beneficial to them going forward. They also kind of jiggered some of the people that are already there and kind of changed some titles. But I mean, I think bringing in Andy Dingler is a great move for him, former longtime Jags executive. Bringing in Sean Herrock, I think, is a big move for them from the Browns, who's a guy who's obviously very highly respected. But I think bringing in Lenny Mcgill as a senior national scout, I mean, Lenny is very highly regarded, has been doing this for a long time, has gotten offers before to leave Miami, passed on them. He felt like this was a good move, so he made one. And then bringing in Jurgen, who's a national scout for him in New England, as their new college director, I think is a move with a lot of promise as well. So I think the Raiders have made a lot of changes, and I think most of them have been good ones.
And you see, I mean, from the team perspective, they seem to be in a bit more of a win now scenario than either of those two first teams that we talked about, the Giants or the Bears. Do you think they see it that way in terms of the way that they're looking at things? I mean, Derek Carr, say what you want, kind of a fringe quality quarterback.
Yeah.
But they have a lot of other weapons on the roster. When you look at the receivers, the tight end, offensive line, defensive line, they've got some strong spots.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the Adams move, to me, you don't make that move if you're not going for it. And so I think that they are all in. No one wins the Super Bowl in a vacuum. And I think a lot of teams are, rather than saying, hey, we're going to sit back and build through the draft, they want to win today. And so they're packaging their picks and going out and getting veterans. And it's going to be, there's probably no clear illustration of their win now philosophy than that they had three first rounders from a draft 4 years ago, and they're not bringing any of them back for year 5.
Those guys were head scratchers at the time, and remain head scratchers now.
Yeah. So I would say they definitely are going for it, and good on them for taking that approach. It's not a safe approach, but it is a bold approach, and you got to root for people that are that believe in themselves and that are not leaving themselves in any rope, so to speak.
Yep. Adding Chandler Jones, adding Anthony Everett as well in free agency there. It'll be really fascinating to watch how they grow and sort of what they become now in the wake of this really weird Gruden Mayock experiment that has left them not in horrible shape roster wise.
Yeah. I would agree. I think they have a very manageable roster, and while they didn't hit on the early picks as much, they did some good things in the later picks, and picked up
no first or second rounders this year. So yeah. So, you're looking back over the last couple of years.
Yeah,
right.
You're just talking about Mayock.
Yeah, the Mayock. I couldn't agree with that more. There's a bunch of dudes on that roster that hey, Hunter Renfrow,
Exactly, and that's another great example. Yeah. And so so I mean, it's kind of in a backhanded way. They did some good things. It just was maybe not in those early rounds when you really got a hit. But they hit in the later rounds at least. Yeah,
it's hard when you go way off the board and then it kind of goes the way everybody else expected and not you.
Yeah.
You end up with Josh Allen, it's great. You end up with Daniel Jones, not so much.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if we sit down here and go down through their first rounders, tough. But again, I think they did a little bit better work on day 3 and that kind of thing. And some of those guys have stuck around, and more power to them.
All right, I don't want to get you in any hot water here, but we did mention Trubisky a minute ago. Obviously, Mahomes was the gem of that draft. the one other quarterback, Deshaun Watson, has been back in the news, and I can't make out how the Browns wouldn't have known that there was more coming with all of the diligence that was done over the course of a year on this. You getting any sense of where this is going to end up? It feels like Deshaun Watson's going to be missing at least a season at this point, and that the Browns maybe should be feeling some buyer's remorse.
Matt, here's what I heard, and I don't have first-person information necessarily, but my understanding on all this was when the Browns made that trade, they felt like it was pretty settled. Okay. What I had heard was that the legal team representing the women had one person who really felt like she had a real criminal case against Watson. But she, because it was a civil action, she didn't really want to take part because she felt like it would kind of cheapen her experience and what had really happened, et cetera, et cetera. I didn't watch the HBO special. I didn't see what happened there, but my impression is that he kind of came off as, I made a few mistakes, but this was a little overblown. And what I've heard is that this 23rd accuser may be that one that really has, I don't want to use the term axe to grind, but feels like this was not a small thing and is a little resentful that this is being now pitched as in the past, maybe overblown, et cetera, et cetera. If that's the case, if this is someone who really wants to, be heard, what have you, it could be that Watson misses a year. And with the contract that he signed, that could be a major blow to the Browns from a roster management standpoint, from a cap management standpoint, all those kind of things. It's hard having that much of an investment in one player, even if he is your quarterback. And much has been made about how Seattle had a window with Russell Wilson before, when he was still on his rookie deal, et cetera, et cetera. So there could be some challenges and some rough waters ahead for the Browns if that turns into a more protracted legal situation.
Right. Might be the Jacoby Brissett show, which who knows? They've got a good roster. They got a good roster outside of that position.
I agree.
When you talk about how they're built up front, obviously their edge rushers, their secondary. There's a lot to like with that roster.
Yeah.
It's crazy. I mean, it seems like sports is overlapping with sort of like the news more often than ever recently. And I mean, with the golf league, with Saudi Arabia and all the stuff that goes on with that, this is like, there's like the moral question, the ethical question that goes along with what's the right thing for our sports team. Mm-hmm. We're only here to talk about that latter part. Mm-hmm. But it's crazy how it overlaps things there. And yeah, I would understand if what you're saying is true. If she was planning on staying quiet and heard what she heard and wanted to set the record straight, that would certainly be understandable from a human perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Let's talk about another weird one, a little bit less hot water-ish. Do you believe that Tom Brady was set to become like a part owner GM of the Miami Dolphins? Is that what happened there? Or do you have any sense of what your interpretation of events was as far as that went?
There's an awful lot of smoke there for there to be no fire, Matt. I really haven't talked to anyone about that. I really haven't entertained it that much. It's been a incredibly fun story to track, especially given Stephen Ross's ties to Michigan and the available free agents out there, I guess, being Sean Payton and Brady's situation and what have you. It's fascinating. I think that it's clear that the Dolphins were in the mood to make some big moves. If that was one of them, what could be bigger than that? But I don't know what the answer is. I could only speculate on it. But like I say, it's awfully.
Yeah, there's a lot of smoke. Obviously, the Brian Flores lawsuit had the stuff about meeting with the famous quarterback on the boat and things like that, and it would defy logic to think that wasn't Brady, and that something with his retirement and then returning, and then Bruce Arians retiring, just seems like there's something going on there.
Yeah.
Can't wait to see how that plays out next year. He might take that $380 million to go sit up in the booth, which wouldn't be so bad.
Well,
But
hey, listen, as a Saints guy, I'd love for him to be in a different, division and conference, but on the other hand, the Saints kind of had his number last year, so maybe I don't have to worry about it as much.
man, and we'll see where Sean Payton ends up now, because if he was involved in that, that was one thing. Now I'm going back to my original hypothesis, which is Jerry Jones. There's no amount of money that he wouldn't pay for Sean Payton.
Lock. I think I don't think there's any question about that. I mean, he's got the history and all those kinds of things, and yeah, I think that was always, to me. I don't have the inside information there, but it seems like that's been the plan for a while. I mean, he's got a home in Dallas. It would be perfect for him. And not only that, I don't think Sean Payton goes anywhere where he doesn't have a very, at worst, a very settled quarterback situation. And I think, obviously with the money that the Cowboys are paying Dak, they are certainly settled there. And so, I think that's one reason why he walked away from New Orleans, is there's been uncertainty with Jameis and what have you. And I think that, if you want to run the kind of offense that Peyton's going to run, you got to have a mature quarterback there. And so I think Dallas will make a lot of sense, but, we'll see. And, of course, if they all went to Miami, that'd make a lot of sense too.
Yeah, I think he was pretty interested in having Tom Brady as his quarterback, it seems like, which makes sense. Well, let's talk about another quarterback, or former quarterback, Josh McCown. That was a weird one. Almost went from the clipboard to the head coach, the clipboard to the headset. I guess he already had a headset, but in one move. What do you make of that? Can we see more of that going forward?
I don't, I'm in Houston, and there are a lot of people that work for the team that I have a lot of respect for, but I still think that that's a franchise that still kind of can't get out of its own way. And I don't know. I mean, Matt, you know me for a long time. I'm a little old school. I just believe people should kind of pay their dues. I don't think to me, it's not right to ask someone to go from the field straight to the head coaching spot. And you're running past a lot of people that have been preparing for that day for a long time. I just think that Houston has got a lot of issues they need to deal with before they add in another issue of a brand new head coach, especially after they just fired a guy that was essentially, a bit of let's say a surprise hire. My feeling, Matt, is if you're a GM who hires a coach and you fire him after the first year, you got to go with him because you're the one who made that decision. And I don't think they gave Culley a proper opportunity. I think that there's a big learning curve with being one of 32 NFL head coaches. And I don't know, I get kind of passionate because I don't like it when guys pay their dues and then they aren't given a chance to grow and mature and flourish. And whether or not Culley was the right hire, I just think it's really disappointing they didn't give him more rope.
It really felt like more of an interim hire than somebody who they really intended. And then it seemed a little bit kind of sloppy with the way that they ended up with Lovey. They're, not to question either individual in any way, but they are one of these teams, and you'll see this around sports sometimes, where it's very hard to make sense of how their decisions fit in with one another. And that's always a red flag for me. It's very hard when you're not inside a building to know the way every decision is getting made. That's one thing I learned from being inside the building is there's a lot of stuff that we're privy to. Maybe some of it is not the best information in the world, but this is the information that we're going off of.
Right.
And from the outside, you can't always see that. But what you should see from the outside is a consistency of process. And without that, I think that, you're going somewhere, but you don't know where you're going. And so you're making great time getting nowhere fast.
Amen and amen. Amen and amen. I mean, it seems like the only thing that's mattered for the last 3 or 4 years was getting Nick Caserio in as GM. And so they've done that now. But since that has happened, there have been a lot of stops and starts along the way that I don't think were maybe anticipated. And I'm not taking anything away from Caserio, but it seems like he's been hampered by a lot of things starting off that maybe you wouldn't want to be hampered by, and perhaps the other 5 new GMs or whatever haven't had to deal with, and so it's been harder to get to kind of get some momentum than maybe others thought it would be.
So we've talked a lot in the past, and there's probably no better expert than you on the way that different scouting departments are structured around the league. And I know in the past we've talked about what you alluded to earlier, which is just those years and years of scouting experience that seem to leave the league every year and seems to get younger. And we've seen sort of the proliferation of a bit of the Patriots method, which is really where your job is to gather information, your job is to do X, Y, and Z, and then us decision makers are going to evaluate that information. We're not asking you for any sort of opinion whatsoever. And then there's also, I think, some old school that still is out there around the league. And then there's even more of the, I don't want to call it like the analytics approach, but people that are willing to take in different, often newer sources of information and really layer that into the process. I guess where I want to start, I want to ask you about like where the league is going as far as that goes in a bigger picture, but how do the Texans fit into that? Do you have a sense for how they're built?
No, I haven't gotten a sense for how they're built. I don't know how much stock they put in analytics. They don't have a glittery analytics guy, if there is even one in the league right now. So it's hard to, so they don't have that to hang their hat on. And I haven't done a deeper dive into how big their analytics department is. I never got the sense that the Patriots were highly analytics minded when Caserio was there. So I don't think that's something he would necessarily bring with him. And my sense is that Jack Easterby, who's kind of, Cal McNair's right-hand man, has made that a mandate as far as the way he wants the team to be run. So I don't have a good sense of that. What I do know is that their DPP, Jim Lipford, was one of the 10 Bart List winners. So for this year, so they've got a good guy at the top who is a very good evaluator, who's highly regarded. They've got some scouts on the staff that are highly regarded. And I guess if I was in Caserio's shoes, I would trust my guys. But again, coming from the model that he came from, he's probably more inclined to make his own decisions. And I just don't know where analytics plays into that and how heavy a role that is in their evaluation.
Yeah, they have an interesting draft, very SEC heavy. Really liked some of their picks this year. I know some people thought that Sauce should have gone ahead of Stingley. I have no issue taking Stingley at number 3. To me, it's just a health question. It's not a talent question. You look at Mechie in the 2nd round. You look at Harris in the 3rd round. These are players that if you watch college football, you know who they are. It'll be interesting to see if that can be a successful strategy going forward, how that fits out for them, or if kind of the lack of consistency that we were talking about continues to kind of bite them. I don't know if that does come from Easterby or even McNair himself.
I kind of like the way that their footprint is being developed. I'm a guy who believes in offensive linemen, and I'm okay with them in the 1st round. And even a guard, I think, is important, especially if you're trying to break in a younger quarterback. So, Stingley was a little surprised to me, but I don't have the insights, and I'm not a scout, and I don't pretend to be one. I will certainly defer to them on the Stingley pick. But I like the guard from A&M in the middle of the 1st round. I think you have to have those. You got to be able to count on your offensive line, and especially when you're building. And so I thought that was a good move.
Yeah, both really young, really high upside, really talented athletes between Stingley and Kenyon Green. So at least they could be excited. All right, so let's zoom back out there and talk about that. So where are front offices going?
It's interesting because I think that right now the trend is expanded front offices. Your average right now is about 20 scouts in a front office. And when I say scouts, I'm talking about evaluators, pro and college. That number is probably, I think the last time we counted that prior to this past year was maybe an 18, and I think the average was around 18 and a half or 19. So you're seeing expanded scouting staffs. I think there's a commitment to growing them. I don't necessarily think that's a good thing, Matt. I think you've just got to have guys that are in places. You've got to have a process like you've alluded to, and I think you've got to have a very regimented hierarchy, decision-making process, and I think you've got to know that the guys that are in the areas are the best that you can get. And that's why I think Seattle does it well. I think the Packers do it well. I think the Steelers do it well, even though they're kind of blowing things up right now and kind of going in a different direction. I've been a big admirer of the Saints for a long time. These teams don't have enormous scouting staffs, but I think they've got scouts that are evaluators. They've got scouts that actually are out there looking at players. I'm not trying to pick on, you talked about the information gathering philosophy that the Patriots have kind of championed, and I'm certainly not here to pick on them at all, but I think when you've got a quarterback like Tom Brady, that covers a lot of sins. And if you look at some of their first rounders over the last 4 or 5 years, they've missed on a lot of them. And I can recall 5 or 6 years ago at the combine, a college director saying, sometimes we laugh at their picks. I don't think, and Cole Strange may turn out to be John Hanna, but I think a lot of teams were surprised to see him taken so early by the team. My point is not to pick on the Patriots. It's just to say that I think more teams should be relying on their scouts as evaluators rather than just information gatherers. I think there is a role certainly for analytics, but it's got to be homogenized and all that. And I think that that's happening. One thing that I've heard from scouts in Minnesota is that the new GM there, Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, has done a great job of kind of bringing that into it without going hard in one direction or the other. And so I kind of hope that Minnesota does experience some success because maybe they've cracked the code. Maybe they figured it out. But to answer your question, I think front offices are getting bigger, and I think they're getting more towards the New England side philosophy. But I don't think that's necessarily the better thing. I don't think you need more scouts. I think you need better scouts. You need to be able to evaluate them on your own, and you've got to have obviously good decision makers at the top who can synthesize all the information that's coming in and helping making the right picks.
Right. Sort of quality, not quantity. One thing that I like about the Patriots is that they cross-train their personnel staff on the pro and on the college side.
That's
so
true.
It's not like you'll just have a college region or you'll just be the pro scout in charge of the NFC, whatever. You get exposure on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, as much as I like that, I wonder if maybe there are also some real advantages to, I think the model that it sounds like you prefer, not that aspect necessarily, but having somebody who's a real expert in their region and somebody that you can really trust to own their region, like 20 years ago, we would have called scouting. That is something that if you're cross-training all the time, you do get different exposure, but to really develop those relationships and to watch players as they come through for 3, 4, 5 years and see their progression, not just a snapshot of them 4 to 6 games from their senior year of whatever they put on film in those games that you happen to watch on them. Sometimes all of the information gathering is really great. I think more information is better. But if people wonder why in the spring there are so many risers and fallers, a lot of the time it's because we're relying on pieces of information that aren't as good as the information that a quality scout gathered before November.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. It's fascinating to watch the people that rise and fall. And I wish I knew how much of that is actual because of actual new information and how much of it is, well, I'm hearing at the All-Star games that this guy's hot, or I'm at the combine and everyone's talking about this guy. And then of course, the numbers that players post at the combine that tantalize scouts. I mean, that human element, you can't take that away. But you also don't know how much of it really is have to factor into it. What happens from, I guess, first week of January to the last week of April fascinates me. And I wish I knew how players are adjusted when the season's over, all your scouts are back, all your reports are filed, but now you're changing opinions on key players and key prospects.
Well, I think what's happening though is
it's part of the draft process, but anyway.
On January 1st, your area scouts and your college department, people that have been on the road, your GM a little bit, but like those people are 100% of your opinions at that point.
Mm-hmm.
By the time you get to April,
Mm-hmm.
they're less than 50% of the opinions. And that's where I think things get out of whack. I think the doctors are important. I think the coaches are important. I think all of that is very important. But when you allow all of that to trickle in, all of those other pieces of information, they get poisoned by what somebody's saying on the street. Right. And so it's a tricky process. We're trying to make it a little better here. We've got a new scouting product that we're working on here. I got to keep it on the down low for the time being, but we're working on Sports Info Solutions on that exact question of how to create more valuable scouting data, not just what was the performance of the player, but what really would be analogous to what scouts collect, and is there a way to make that more of a consistent, trackable process? And TBD.
Well, I've seen, let me blow you up for a second, Matt. I've seen the progression of SIS while you've been there. I've seen you when you used to come to CGS. I know how it's grown across the league. So I have confidence that you're going to continue to crack that code. And if you do, then that's really something special, because everyone's trying to find that answer of how to really kind of synthesize the analytics part and the traditional part. So I think you're at a great place, and I have all faith that you'll be able to do that.
Neil, it's like being a Buddhist. You're always trying to achieve nirvana, but you never actually get there.
It's pretty elusive.
That's all we can do is keep trying to get better every day, though, right?
That's the goal, man, for everybody.
All right, Neil, it has been so much fun catching up with you. A big fan of all your work. For anybody that doesn't know, please let the people know where to follow you inside the league, Succeed in Football blog, all of that stuff.
Well, there's a lot of ways to kind of track our content. If you care about hiring and firing, make sure you're following me on Inside the League on Twitter. If you care about kind of the direction of the game and the trends and those kind of things, make sure you're following our blog at Succeed in Football. If you care about a weekly recap of everything that's going on from a football business perspective, register for our newsletter. It's the Friday Wrap, and you can find it all over my Twitter. Finally, if you're looking for a deeper dive into scouting and you want to hear about the business from people in the industry, check out my book. You can find it on Amazon. It's called Scout Speak, and it's a pretty quick read. And like I always say, it doesn't have any big words because I don't know any big words. It's something that you'll enjoy and hear some pretty cool war stories and maybe learn a little bit about the game. I think you picked up for $13 on Amazon. It's out there. Matt, I appreciate the opportunity as always, buddy, and it's always a blast chopping it up with you, man.
Again, if you want to really know what's going on the inside, you need to follow everything Neil is doing and follow Inside the League, because that's it. That's variety for football. For our producer, Justin Stein, and his wife and his newborn, hopefully on the way. For our guest, Neil Stratton, I'm Matt Manocherian, and thank you for listening to the latest episode of Sports Info Solutions Off the Charts Football Podcast.